Hey, I know you. You're that person who was looking for someone to read you the best book of all time. Well, lucky for you, I just happen to have it right here. The Book of the Dun Cow. Shall we get started? Chapter 1. How Mundukani Came to Live with Chanticleer. In the middle of the night, somebody began to cry outside of Chanticleer's coop. If it had been but a few sprinkled tears with nothing more than a moan or two, Chanticleer would probably not have minded. But this crying was more than a gentle moan. By each dark hour of the night it grew. It became a decided wail, and after that it became a definite howl. And howling, particularly at the door of his coop, and in the middle of the night, howling Chanticleer minded very much. Chanticleer the rooster had trouble sleeping anyway, though this was no one's fault but his own. He snored. Well, Chanticleer called it a snore, and everybody else who lived in his coop called it a snore too, but everybody else knew secretly that it was a positive crow. This is the way that it went. As dusk fell, the whole company of the coop would take to their roosts, tuck their heads deep into their neck and shoulder feathers, ruffle, cluck, and fall asleep, Chanticleer among them. For the space of several hours, silence and contentment would fill the coop, and sleep was good. But then Chanticleer would begin to dream, and with his dream he would set up such a sudden loud and raucous snoring that every living soul in the neighborhood of the coop would wake up. Immediately they all had a job to do. They had to pretend that they were still asleep, because it was Chanticleer's snore after all. When his snores came close to the sound of thunder, then Chanticleer woke up too, with a headache. And he wouldn't pretend. He was awake, and he was angry about it. He'd cock his eye angrily at this creature and that, looking for guilt, waiting until one poor soul couldn't stand it any longer, and moved. "You!" Chanticleer would cry, and the hen would wilt, moving very much all of a sudden. "Ah ha ha! You!" The rooster's comb would stand up like a fan on the top of his head. He would flut down and strut up to the sad hen and fix her with a one-eyed stare from the side of his rooster head. You! Sleep on my straw, eat my grain, hide from the wind and dry from the rain, and how do you repay my great goodness to you? You woke me! How do you like that? And what's more, you woke me up!" Then Chanticleer would make a noise which he considered to be something better than a snore. It was a true crow, and it entered the shivering hen's ear with such a force that she wouldn't sleep for the rest of the night. Back to his perch the rooster would grump, twisting and turning and mumbling his perturbation. He did most certainly despise to be awakened from his dreams, but finally he would nod and dream again. It was more than a fact that Chanticleer the rooster had trouble sleeping. It was also a well-known fact. All the coop had a healthy fear of awakening his feathered thunder. Therefore, when somebody began to weep outside of his coop one night, everybody heard it, but nobody moved. And when weeping became wailing, they pretended with a skill both admirable and desperate. And when wailing developed into pure howling, why, every last chicken turned into a stone. Oh, their hearts were moved. Who wouldn't be moved to pity by that sad, sad voice? Who wouldn't let a tear roll down her beak to hear of the grief which this voice had to tell? All the world seemed a lonely place at the sound of this voice. It wept so pitifully. This voice could make even the stones to cry, which became a particular problem for some 30 chickens who were trying hard to be stones. "Marooned," he cried, whoever he was out there. "Marooned," he wailed. 3 stones sniffed, and 60 eyes shot frightened glances at Chanticleer, but the rooster slept on. The voice sounded like ancient shoe leather. "Don't listen to me," he cried out. "Every good heart should sleep on. No one should be troubled with the burdens which it is given me to bear. Sleep, he sighed. "Sleep on, peaceful souls," he wailed. And then he howled, "Maroon!" A little dribble hung down from Chanticleer's beak, a wet string which went from the tip of his beak to the bottom of his wattle. This was a good sign. It meant that he was sleeping very deeply, and perhaps the chickens would be safe. Yet no sign was absolute, and this was a most unusual occurrence, this voice abroad. So the chickens continued to pretend and to fear. The voice sounded like a mudslide. "Ah me! What I could have been in a better place! Such a wonderful somebody I should have been," he wept. "That it would have been a pleasure to look at. But this is the place, and this is the me. Look at me and be sad. See me and be sorrowful. No!" he wailed suddenly. "No, don't look. No one should be burdened with such a sight. A walking sin. But sleep," he wailed. "Sleep and be what I can never be. It does my soul good to know that someone is at peace. Sleep." And then he howled like the north wind. "Marooned!" Chanticleer stirred. He pulled one claw off the perch. 2 chickens fainted, but it was just motion in his sleep. Restless sleep now, but sleep all the same. "And what about this nose?" cried the voice outside, wounded deeply by this new sorrow. "All of you count yourselves blessed. Go home and call yourselves fortunate before the mirror. For if you wish, you can turn your eyes and look away from this monster of a nose. But me—" "You," said Chanticleer in his sleep. Another chicken passed out. "Ah, master of the universe, me!" "You," drooled Chanticleer. "I have to look at this nose all the time, for here it sits between my eyes like a boot all the day long. Every time I look at anything, there is my nose underneath it. Ah, me, me, but you! Sleep on forever, sleep, sleep!" Then came the cry like a gunshot, "Sleep!" Chanticleer woke up so fast that he swallowed his spit and gagged. "Hear it!" howled the voice outside at the top of his lungs. "I am a walking sorrow. To look at me is to break your heart, but here is my nose, and I can look on nothing else but me. Marooned! Marooned in this sad excuse of a body. Marooned!" That did it. Chanticleer had been snapping his head left and right to prove to himself that there really was a sound about. For a moment he had been so astonished by the noise that he thought it a leftover dream. Who would be such a fool as to make such a noise? Yet there was the word coming down out of the air like an avalanche. Marooned, as real as his headache. That's what did it. Chanticleer the rooster began to beat his wings. "Cack, cack," he started to say, but that wasn't loud enough, not nearly furious enough. He threw out his chest. His neck feathers bristled. "Cock-a-doodle! Cock-a-doodle!" And that still wasn't what he wanted. It should have some cursing in it. He jiggled up and down on the perch, bent his head so far backward that it touched his tail feathers, and cried, "Cock-a-meanie! Cock-a-cock-a-bull! Cock-a-doodle-doo!" That was what he wanted. But it was almost as if the voice outside were happy to hear what Chanticleer had to say, for the word came back with something like a note of conversational cheer in it. "Marooned!" Chanticleer was stunned. 7 chickens fainted dead away, but Chanticleer didn't notice the bodies falling off their perches. He did something else. It must be understood that Chanticleer, though he was able, seldom flew. It was his custom to strut. Strutting permitted pride and a certain show of authority, whereas flying looked mostly foolish in a rooster, lumpish, graceless, and altogether unnecessary. Wings on a rooster, so Chanticleer thought, were not for flying. They were for doing absolutely nothing with, for it is a mark of superiority when part of the body does nothing at all. But sometimes Chanticleer forgot his opinions. In a white rage, he leaped from his perch and beat the air. He flew straight out of the coop, through the door, and over a dog. He saw the dog as he passed over it. That glance fouled up his landing. He thumped like baggage to the ground and rolled over twice. Feathers exploded. While Chanticleer scrambled to stand up amid the feathers, the dog walked up to him and shed tears on his wing. "Feathers," wept the dog, "soft, wonderful feathers," he said miserably, "which sprout the same as hair. Ah me," he wept, "mine is only hide. Hide itches at noontime." He laid a sad paw on Chanticleer's wing. Chanticleer hopped backward from this apparition, staring at him, offended and confounded at once. But the rooster considered himself equal to any occasion. Therefore he split the night air with a ringing crow aimed directly into the dog's enormous nose. Immediately the dog fell down in a heap and rolled over on his back. For a fleeting moment Chanticleer was satisfied. "Hear it!" the dog wept from the bottom of his soul, shaking uncontrollably. "Master of the universe, listen to this. To one you give such a sweet melody, to another you give a growl." His nose ran like a river. "Maroon!" he blubbered. Chanticleer did something like a sneeze, but not a sneeze at all. It was anger choking in his throat. Well, if the first one didn't work, then he thought to try another crow, more commanding even than the last, as powerful as a thunderclap and so full of purple cursing that this boxcar would get up and gallop away. So he leaped up onto the very chest of the dog, breathed deeply, and opened his beak next to the flap which he took for an ear. "Cock-a-bloody imbecile!" The crow was tormenting and wonderful. The forest whispered its fear. The leaves shivered. But the dog on his back looked up and kissed Chanticleer on his beak. "Accept my thanks, thou great heart," he wept softly. "More you have done for me with this one song than my mother in all of her sorrowful life." Chanticleer's head snapped back like the cock on a pistol. He was silent for one deadly minute, standing on a roost which was the chest of a dog. Then the words burst out of him like bullets. "I have a perch," he cried. "It's warm because I was sleeping on it. I have a coop. It was quiet for my sleep. A warm perch." He scratched the dog's chest with his right claw as if scratching dirt. "A quiet coop," he scratched with the left. "But you rug, you sack, you woke me up." "Excuse me," whispered the dog, "for speaking at a time like this, but be kind to yourself as you have been to me, and look in another place." Chanticleer lost his speech. Beak open, eyes smoking, he stared at the dog. "Look at the skies," whispered the dog kindly. "Look at the trees where God made beauty, but it is only a sorrow to look on me where God planted ugliness." "Ah," sighed the dog, "such a fine small beak you have." Not his most piercing, his most murderous crow could move this remarkable rag. Not the words of his anger could send this dog away. Chanticleer shuddered with rage. His wattles trembled, his feathers stood out and shivered, and, seeing that there was nothing else to do, he bit the dog savagely on the nose. "Amen, I agree with you," the dog wailed with fresh sorrow. "It is my lasting grief, and I should be grateful if you would bite it off altogether." Chanticleer choked, and he set to pecking the great nose in front of him as if it were a piano, ripping a pear and taking away bits of skin. With every peck the dog said, "Thanks." With every other peck he wept, "But it won't work." And with every third peck he wailed, "Yet thou art more than a friend to me." There came the time, finally, when Chanticleer the rooster himself broke down. After the dog had begun to croon, "My friend is a surgeon, a doctor sent from heaven with healing in his beak," it happened that Chanticleer himself began to cry. He slid down to the ground and lay on his back with his two claws pointing up to heaven and gurgled a broken crow. He wept. And of course, side by side, each on his back, they made a chorus, for the dog wept with him. "It is," said the dog in commiseration, "a convincing argument, this body. Mountains last forever, though it was a worthy effort, good friend, but mountains last forever, and many a worthy spirit breaks upon them." He sighed, and then wept quietly and almost peacefully. Suddenly the rooster said, "Headache! Headache!" he snapped, and then he didn't strut, he stumbled into the coop. The dog rolled his eyes without rolling his body from its back. "A doctor sent from heaven," he said. In the morning, Chanticleer the rooster stepped out of his coop to crow at the sun and to rouse up all of his chickens. When he was done on this particular morning, he coughed hoarsely, and then he noticed that he was standing on something warm. He looked down and saw a dog smiling up at him. The dog was shaking his head. There were tears in his eyes. "Such a voice, in such a fine small beak," he said. "Such a headache," said the rooster, "from such a rug." Humbly the dog lowered his head. "Thank you, doctor," he said. The rooster hopped down and strutted away. His tail feathers were flags behind him. "The name is Chanticleer," he said, "you doormat." "It's a little thing, a nothing really," called the dog behind him, "but there is a name for me, too. Of course there is no beauty in it. If the doctor wants to call me doormat instead of Mundulcani dog, this dog will be happy." From that day forward, Mundulcani dog would feel sad if Chanticleer crowed to the rising sun from anywhere else but his own sad and lumpy back. Chapter 2. 3 words about Chanticleer's ability to crow. Chanticleer the rooster crowed when he was angry, to be sure. Upset or out of humor, he could crow the fear of God into a wood tick, or into nearly anything else for that matter. But no one must get the idea that this was the only time when he crowed, nor the only kind of crow he knew. Crowing was his profession. Generally, Chanticleer divided his crows into 2 major categories. Certain of them he called his occasional crows, crows born of the moment, the occasion, the mood, and not according to any due time. Hereunder he had crows for all moods and feelings. Crows for laughter and crows for grief, a whooping crow for joy which made joy come alive and dance right there in the coop. A soft, insinuating crow for shame, at which the hens would hide their heads under their wings. He could crow a certain spilling crow when he admired something very much. He could warn the stars themselves with a crow like a bloody alarum, and then the stars themselves would stand on guard. And at the death of someone beloved, Chanticleer the rooster mourned the passing by strutting to the roof of his coop, and there sounding a throaty crow which rolled across the countryside like the tolling of a heavy iron bell. And then God's creatures would surely pause, bend their heads, and weep. Crows of pride and crows of glory, crows on the occasion of a victory or a defeat, and crows, too, for the plain sake of crowing. But there was another whole set of crows which he used always at certain special hours during the day. These did come in due time, and these were called the canonical crows. They told all the world, or at least that section of the world over which he was lord, what time it was, and they blessed the moment in the ears of the hearer. By what blessing? By making the day, and that moment of the day, familiar, by giving it direction and meaning and a proper soul. For the creatures expected his canonical crows, and were put at peace when they heard them. Yes, yes, they would say, the day is our day, because Chanticleer has made it ours. That they would say in the morning, grateful that by his crow the day should hold no strangeness nor fear for them. And at noon, the day is halfways over. The best part is still coming. It was a comfort to be able to measure the day and the work in it. 7 times a day, dutifully and with a deep sense of their importance, and by the immemorial command of the divine, Chanticleer crowed his canonical crows. At dawn, from Mundulcani's lumpy back, he crowed a fresh green crow which sounded like chilly water, and which awakened the hens on the spot. When it was time to go to work, he crowed another crow. A-choo, choo, choo! Something like a steam engine starting up, and then one couldn't help it. One's wings began to beat, and claws would start to scratch the ground, digging for seeds and grubs, and beaks would begin to peck. At 9 o'clock, at noon, and then again at 3 o'clock, the rooster crowed crows to announce what kind of day was going by. Up went his head, with its comb as red as coral, its beak as black as jet. He watched the scratchers scratching. He considered all the news of all the things which were happening in that day up until that moment, and then he crowed some busy crows about this and that and such. Every creature knew the day when Chanticleer was done with these crows, at 9 o'clock, at noon, and then again at 3, and kindly did the time pass by. The 6th crow came when the sun was going down. A hen was glad to hear it for several reasons. For one, it sounded something like a compliment. It came across the evening air and patted each one on the back, and it made each forehead cool as if with a breeze. "Good," it said, "good, and better than you did yesterday. Now stop, eat supper, and rest easy." And so these were the other reasons a hen was glad to hear it. Work was done and supper was coming. But the 7th was the kindest crow of all. This was as quiet as nightfall. This crow was the night at peace upon her nest. This was settle and rest, and you are safe, and amen, and go now to sleep. For done, when it is well done, is a very good word. When Chanticleer crowed his canonical crows, the day wore the right kind of clothes. His hens lived and scratched in peace, happy with what was, and unafraid of what was to be. Even wrong things were made right, and the gray things were explained. A third word concerning Chanticleer's crows must now be spoken, though he himself was unaware of it. A third category of crows would, within a year of Mundocani's coming to the coop, burst from Chanticleer's throat with a terrible power. For an enemy was gathering himself against this rooster and his land. Within the year Chanticleer would find his land under a treacherous attack. And then, in that war, this third kind of crowing would become his necessary weapon. Cruel crows, sharp, explosive crows, murderous and thwarting, they would be called crows potens. But Chanticleer knew nothing of this now, of neither the enemy, nor the war which was to be, nor the killing crows which he had it in him to crow, the potens. For the time being, Chanticleer was busy about lesser affairs, though he himself would have called them important enough. And we will stop there for now. Join us again next time for Chapter 3.